The number one thing that I see over and over again that holds businesses back is so simple that you're not even going to believe me when I tell you what the answer is. You're going to be like, Steve, come on. It's got to be something more complicated than that. But here's the deal. I think business leaders, this includes myself, I think oftentimes we're really good at making things really complicated, okay? So let's just break down the complexity today. And I want to give you 3 things to look at in your business to help you to drive greater value and to get unstuck. So if you're feeling stuck right now, if you're struggling, or if your strategy is not working, I'm going to show you why that may be the case. But before I get into these 3 things, let me just tell you a story that prompted this episode. All right, so the 3rd and 4th week of each month, I have a unique opportunity of working with CEOs and their teams, and we review their strategies, and we bring in the financials of their business, and we look at, okay, how are they doing from a strategy perspective and from a financial performance perspective, and then we make adjustments along the way. So it's a really unique opportunity to get into these companies and to understand what's working well and what's not working well. And then I provide some guidance, we work together, we collaborate, and then we drive greater value. And we do this over and over and over again. But here's the deal. Here's the number one problem that I see. Spoiler alert, I'm going to tell you what it is right now, and I'm going to tell you 2 things to look at to make sure you understand how to fix this, okay? So first, the biggest thing is that leaders lose sight of the constraint of their company. That's it, the constraint. I call this their strategic problem. So in my framework, when I help companies to build their strategy blueprint, one of the first things we do is identify their strategic problem. So think of it like this. Your business will only grow up to its constraint. Okay, once it hits that constraint, it will no longer grow until you solve that constraint. Now, sometimes businesses, they don't solve the constraint and they just stay stuck. And then that's when they either fail or they bring in somebody like me and I come in and I turn around the business. And how do I turn around the business? I turn it around by identifying constraints, and then we work together to solve those constraints by allocating more resources to solving that one constraint. And guess what? When that constraint goes away, the company grows, and then it will bump up against the next constraint. And then you solve that constraint, and then you go on and go on and go on and go on. And then you repeat this over and over and over again. And that's essentially how you get a business to grow and to maximize value. But if you're not focused on the constraint, you're doing a bunch of random things. So that's the first thing that I would say is if you feel stuck and if your strategy's not working, perhaps you haven't identified the real constraint. Maybe you follow my approach. Maybe you're already a member of my community. And if so, you know I talk about the strategic problem all the time. But guess what? Even if you have the strategic problem identified, you constantly have to look at it and ask yourself, is this still the biggest constraint of the business? Is this the obstacle that's preventing us from moving forward? And sometimes you have to make adjustments. And maybe a new constraint pops up that needs to be solved, and you solve that constraint, and then you keep moving forward. So you just constantly have to ask yourself, are we focused on the right constraint? All right, that's really, really critical. The second thing I would say is that once you have the constraint identified, your strategic problem very clear, and it's very relevant. I'm not talking about fluffy stuff. I'm not talking about tactical things where you're like, oh, our biggest constraint is that we didn't send ABC's order out yesterday. That's a tactical thing. The constraint may be that your team is not sending orders out in time generally, right? So that may be a constraint. Like stockouts may be a constraint, or there may be an issue with one of the processes in your manufacturing that's causing that constraint to exist. So don't get too tactical about like operational issues. You want to identify what's the one thing holding you back. Okay, so once you identify that, then you have to go back to your strategy. And I use this framework called IARs. So I invented this a while ago. It's what we use at Coltivar. It stands for initiatives, actions, and results. So when you have a strategy in place, you want to identify the initiatives you're going to pursue in order to execute on your strategy. So what I would say is that once you have your strategic problem identified, look at your initiatives and ask yourself, okay, are these initiatives going to help us to overcome our constraint? And if not, there's no shame in getting rid of those initiatives or putting them on hold or modifying them. Sometimes you have to refine the initiative to get more clarity. Maybe it's too generic at the beginning and nobody understands what the initiative is. So refining things is going to be really critical because the initiative is going to be the general direction. It's going to be the guiding light to execute your strategy and to overcome these constraints, right? So look at your initiatives, make sure they're solid. I would say don't have more than 3 to 5. Some companies may have like 10 initiatives. That's just way too much. Okay, it's too much. I'd rather work with a company with 1 initiative than 10. All right, so fewer is better. Just stay super focused and make sure the initiatives are helping you to solve your constraint, your strategic problem. And then next, if your strategic problem is identified, you have really solid initiatives, I would go down to the next level, which remember IARs, the A stands for actions. I would look at your actions. So just the other week, like I was saying at the beginning, I have this unique opportunity to work with these companies. And in these meetings, we pull up the software that we use, right, to analyze companies and to track strategy and everything else. It's our internal software at Coltivar. And so we have this pulled up on the screen at this client, and we're looking at all the actions that are nested underneath these initiatives. Because we looked at the initiatives, we're like, the initiatives are still good. But then I identified the problem. I was like, look at the actions, right? We have this constraint in the business. We have this initiative that's going to help us to overcome this constraint. But then these actions, they're all over the place, right? You're pursuing these actions that are great to do, but you're not solving the main problem. Think about it. Let's just say your biggest constraint to growth is getting more leads. Perhaps you don't get enough leads. And if you got leads, your conversion's high enough where you'd convert them into revenue. And then when you look at your initiatives, one of your initiatives may be to generate more leads, right? So you're like, okay, good. We're aligned with solving this problem. But then when you look at your actions, let's just say your actions include creating a customer satisfaction survey, redoing the website, creating a new bonus and commission structure, and so on and so forth. I think you get the point where like these actions are good and they may be helpful, but they're not solving the biggest constraint. So this is where the CEO's job is paramount because they are responsible for looking at the initiatives, making sure they align with the strategic problem, and then getting into the actions and saying, look, these 5 things are great that you identified, but we're not doing 1, 3, and 4, right? Eliminate them. Just focus on 2 and 5, for example. So that's what good CEOs do, is that they allocate an excessive amount of resources in one direction to focus the company on solving the one constraint that's holding them back. Pretty simple, right? That's what I was talking about in the beginning. You're gonna be like, Steve, come on. It's not that simple. It really is. I think a lot of the issues that the companies that we work with face is that there's just too much coming at them. There's like too much noise, too much distraction. There's too many demands on their time, and they're just all over the place. The best performing companies that we work with or in our portfolio are those that stay laser focused on the right actions, fewer actions, the actions with the biggest upside. And that's what I would encourage you today is look at your actions if you're using the IAR framework and just make sure that you don't have too many things that are all over the place. Focus is really the key here. And if you can get really good at identifying your constraints, solving those constraints, and then doing that over and over again, your business will be wildly successful. Trust me, I've seen it over and over again. All right. That's what I have for you. If you want to talk about this in your business or you want to hop on a one-on-one strategy call, you can always do that by going to coltivar.com. I'll provide some info down in the description. But thanks for joining me for this episode. I wish you all the best in business, and I can't wait to launch the next episode that will help you to scale your business. All right, be sure to share if you got value out of it. And until next time, cheers.